Imagine being told that you may never speak properly, that you may never read, that you may need support for the rest of your life. And then imagine walking through the gates of Cambridge University, not as a student, but as a professor. That was the extraordinary journey of Jason Arday. But there's something you need to know before hearing this story, because just when his rise seemed to have reached an impossible summit, another chapter began, one that has placed parts of his remarkable public story under intense scrutiny. Stay until the end, because Jason Arday's story isn't simply about proving people wrong anymore. It's about what achievement really means when the story becomes more complicated than the headline. Jason grew up in South London. At 3 years old, he was diagnosed with autism and global developmental delay. He didn't begin speaking until around 11, and according to the biographical accounts that made his story famous, he couldn't read or write until he was 18. Think about that. At an age when other students were preparing for university, Jason was still mastering skills most people learn as children. Expectations for his future were painfully low. One careers advisor reportedly suggested unpaid volunteer work might be the most realistic path available to him. Cambridge, a professorship, an academic career, almost unimaginable. But Jason had something expectations couldn't measure: the ability to keep moving. Then came one of those encounters that can redirect an entire life. Jason entered a sports and development course and met lecturer Sandro Sundari. Sundari didn't focus only on what Jason couldn't do. He saw what might still be possible. And Jason began learning, slowly, relentlessly. Education stopped being evidence of everything he had missed and became a door. He eventually completed undergraduate studies, then postgraduate study, then a doctorate. The boy once expected to need lifelong support had entered academia. But Jason wasn't satisfied simply to belong there. He wanted to change who else was allowed through the door. As a young man, Jason reportedly wrote down a series of ambitions. One was to earn a university degree. Another was to work in academia. And among the biggest dreams, becoming a professor. What makes goals powerful isn't writing them down. It's continuing when almost everything about your starting point says they shouldn't happen. Jason taught, researched, wrote about inequality, education, and representation. His academic career progressed through British universities. And then, in 2023, the announcement arrived. At 37, Jason Arday was appointed Professor of Sociology of Education at the University of Cambridge. He became the youngest black person appointed to a professorship there. The child who once couldn't speak was now expected to lecture at one of the most prestigious universities on earth. It sounded like the perfect ending, but it wasn't the ending. The extraordinary part wasn't simply the university name. It was what Cambridge represented. For anyone who had ever been underestimated, Jason's journey appeared to say, your starting point does not have to predict your destination. He spoke about opening higher education to people who had traditionally been excluded from it, about representation, neurodiversity, opportunity, and about allowing people to imagine futures that institutions, or sometimes even the people around them, might never have imagined. His story traveled around the world. Then, suddenly, the story itself became the subject of questions. In 2026, allegations emerged concerning plagiarism and discrepancies connected to parts of Jason's academic and professional record. Those allegations remain contested. Jason denied plagiarism, but scrutiny intensified. And on 5th August 2026, just days before this video, Jason Arday resigned from his Cambridge position. Suddenly, one of Britain's most celebrated stories of academic perseverance became far more complicated. And this matters because inspiration should never require us to ignore uncomfortable facts. Neither should allegations automatically erase everything that came before them. The honest place is somewhere harder, waiting for evidence, allowing investigations to run their course, and refusing to turn a human being into either a perfect hero or a perfect villain. At the beginning, I promised you this story was no longer simply about proving people wrong. And this is why Jason Arday's journey still contains something extraordinary. A child facing profound developmental challenges eventually learned, studied, taught, and reached Cambridge. But his story now carries another lesson. Never confuse inspiration with perfection. Human stories don't stop when we reach the beautiful ending. Sometimes another chapter changes how we understand everything that came before. What happens next for Jason Arday remains uncertain. But perhaps there's still something worth carrying from his journey. Other people's expectations should never become the limits of your imagination. And at the same time, achievement should never place anyone beyond questions, accountability, or truth. That's a far less comfortable story, but maybe it's a more human one. And that's exactly why we're here. On See Beyond the Spotlight, we don't just look at the legend, we look for the person behind it. So tell us, whose story should we uncover next? Leave their name in the comments. Your suggestion could become our next documentary. And come back for the next story, because the people we think we understand often have another chapter waiting. Every legend has a story. We uncover the one the world rarely sees.